Before we go,
Oh boy.
Travis, the last question always goes to the guest. It's the gimmick I like to have on this podcast. If there's anything you want to ask me, now is the chance. If you, I like to throw that on you. So if you got nothing, you always plead the fifth.
Okay, I got one for
Please.
you, Will. When you listen to a podcast, at what point does it be like, okay, I really like and enjoy this, or I'm like, I just wasted 15 minutes of my time? When does that happen for you, and how do you decide what's a good podcast versus something that needs some work or it's just not good at all?
That is a question I've never been asked before, and honestly, I've never thought about it. That's a great question. Well, if it's I can tell immediately. I can tell within the first 5 minutes. I can just go yuck. Whether it's that this doesn't sound good, or the guest is just boring, or they're not interested. Like you can tell a bad host like pretty immediately. So that's pretty easy. I can turn a podcast on and off. But honestly, as a podcaster, I have my podcasts I listen to frequently, and a lot of them aren't well known. A lot of them are pretty small, other than Joe Rogan, who's the biggest in the world. But what makes me know? You know what it is? I hear their voice and I try and picture what they look like. If I can listen to their voice and I go, what does this person look like? And I think, try to think, what color hair they have. They wear glasses. They have a beard, right? That's when I'm actually invested in a podcast, because I made a personal connection with that podcast, with that host. There was a wrestling podcast I used to listen to by the name of Steel Cage, back in 2017, 18. And there was a guest, a panelist they had on. And if he was on the podcast, I would never miss it. But if he wasn't, I could get 15 minutes in and go, all right, he's not here. This is boring. Let me get out of here. And then he broke off and started his own podcast. I followed him to the new podcast and left Steel Cage. Right? And he still podcasts here and there and whatever. So what the key to liking a podcast for me is the host. I need to connect with the host. You can have great guests. The guests can be great. But if the host is boring, because they're the staple of the show. You can say, Rogan's great, but his guests are better, which is true. But it's his show. I connect with him more than his guests because he's there more.
Gotcha.
So me as a host, I'm very bombastic. I can be very loud. I can be a little annoying. But someone like you're a little more quiet and reserved. If you notice, I try to tone it down a little bit when I ask my questions.
No.
Not be all over the place and loud. Whereas at some of my other podcasts. So I do that to try and, get on your level. So that's a great question. What makes me fall in love with a podcast? It's the host. I try and picture what they look like. And, it's always something I'm interested in. If it's wrestling, if it's movies, if it's, any of the above. But it's very hard for me to listen to a new podcast because my time is valuable and I take listening to podcasts very seriously. So if you want to try and squeeze into my schedule, it's very, very tough. But that's just me.
Gotcha. Fair enough. All
right. Anything else before we go out of here?
No. I mean, it's very enlightening and illuminating that, we have our styles. Yeah. I'm trying to be very calm and cool because I want you to kind of relax and kind of get into, a groove where you just kind of open up to me. I didn't mind the fact that you were, high energy. I'm like, this is great. Come on, you've had those guests, right? Maybe you haven't, but some of those times you get someone, you got to pull their teeth to get anything out of them at all. And they're just not going to, it's not because they're trying to be difficult. It's just not in their nature.
Yeah.
Once the microphone and the camera's on, it's like,
yeah.
And then I turn the microphone and camera off and it's like, oh yeah, this is over with. This is great. I'm like, where was that 15 minutes ago?
I've had a few of those, and in the beginning I go, this is gonna be a bumpy ride. But towards the end of it, for some reason, I get them in a groove, and then they're just rocking and rolling. So maybe that's a test to me again. Pat myself on the back.